A potential US Steel deal has been a long time in the making, and we saw a surge of over 20% in US Steel stock, reflecting optimism as the deal with Nippon Steel progresses. Late last week, President Trump made news by reviving the deal and endorsing a partnership with Japan's Nippon Steel. Under that plan, it would remain headquartered in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with an American CEO and a board with a US majority overseeing operations. Now, Nippon would invest $14 billion, including building a new US Steel mill and upgrading existing plants. The agreement would address national security concerns while allowing foreign investment. Our next guest has been following this all very closely. He's Axios' business editor, Dan Primack. Dan, it is always good to see you. So you argue in your piece, Dan, you say, listen, this actually is all entering, I think, Dan, you called it the ludicrous stage. Correct me if I'm wrong. What did you mean by that, Dan?
I mean, for starters, we get an announcement from Trump and sort of from US Steel last Friday saying there is a, quote, partnership. They make no mention of the acquisition of the $55 per share that US Steel shareholders are supposedly getting, but maybe not because we haven't called it an acquisition. And then today, Tuesday, when the markets reopen, US Steel shares continue to trade on the New York Stock Exchange, which decides not to halt it or even explain why they haven't halted it. So everybody thinks there's a deal, but isn't 100% sure. And we haven't seen any of the real details. You know, you talk about that $14 billion that Nippon has promised. Maybe. Is it guaranteed? If so, how? The earlier pledges were just that. They were pledges. But Nippon could have bailed on those if it wanted to for no particular reason. So really, this is the strangest thing. We have a massive acquisition, a $15 billion acquisition that no one's acknowledging right now as an acquisition. And US Steel isn't saying it, basically because they don't want to step on Trump's toes because he's got this big in-person press conference on Friday.
Yeah, don't you feel to some extent, Dan, like this is a bit of face saving though? And you can almost look at the outcome in the market to say, oh, okay, so we're calling it a partnership, but effectively the deal is going to close as originally envisioned all the way back in like December 2023. And then so we're just sort of working out politics. So President Trump can say 70,000 jobs, 14 billion, headquarters in Pittsburgh. So look at that. Well, essentially, I just let the deal close. It feels like that's what the market's saying.
Basically, yes, although that's embarrassing for US Steel. Or US Steel should be embarrassed that it feels it has to kowtow in that sense. And as for the Pittsburgh thing, that was a big announcement, part of the announcement Friday, right? The headquarters will remain in Pittsburgh. The headquarters was always going to remain in Pittsburgh. That was part of the deal. The only reason it was going to move from Pittsburgh, or that US Steel even threatened that, was if the deal did not close. So that was never a source of negotiation in the first place.
Dan, I did hear Senator Dave McCormick give an interview this morning, and he talked about how there's going to be a U.S. CEO. He said there's going to be a U.S. majority board. U.S. is going to have golden share in Nippon Steel's takeover of U.S. Steel. Do we know? Is this what Nippon has signed off on all this already, Dan?
We don't know because they haven't said anything either. So we're not exactly sure. And then let's assume that what McCormick said is true and that all comes to pass. It's still unclear why any of that necessarily matters. Now, to some extent, would you obviously rather have local ownership local management of US Steel? Sure. It's closer to the workers. It's closer to the product. It's closer to the customer. Should be more responsive. However, go back to that $14 billion in promised investment. Just because you have a US CEO and a US board of the subsidiary, they can't pull. It's not like they have access to the bank accounts. They can't pull that money if it's not forthcoming. That money's still coming from Japan or not coming from Japan. That golden share isn't really necessarily worth anything when it comes to that money coming in or future plans.
So do you think this story is this incredibly long and very odd story coming to an end finally? Like, what are you going to watch for? Or do you think we have a few more twists and turns? Because, early with the Prime Minister of Japan, Trump said, it's going to be an investment. The companies didn't know anything about it. They never commented on that comment. And it just sort of went off into the ether. Are we finally into the end game, or do we wait for a couple more things?
I think with all things Trump and every sort of deal he negotiates or doesn't negotiate, you kind of do have to wait till it ends. I will tell you that as of this morning, the Steel Workers Union was completely still in the dark. All they knew were the public statements. They hadn't had any back channel communications over the weekend. So I think we still have to wait. I will say the bigger picture thing here outside of US Steel is what this means for future deal making, cross-border deal making, particularly for deals that might have national security implications. Because one of the takeaways I would think, if I was a foreign acquirer of a US company, is I would look at this and go, okay, if there are national security concerns, the way we leapfrog those is to buy our way out of it, promise lots of investment, and then those national security concerns maybe will get put aside.
Dan, switching gears, last question. I want to ask you only because I know you write about and report about the IPO market a lot. So I have the chance to ask you. I'm going to take it, Dan, and your sources are great. The IPO market, just explain to me, Dan, where we are now, but also where do you think we are in the second half? How strong do you think that IPO market is going to be, Dan? And what are the variables that would depend on?
For starters, I think we are seeing, legit green shoots of a comeback, right? Because not only are you seeing some fintech, it was kind of a bunch of fintech names, and then everything went on hold after Liberation Day, and things are coming back. Circle launched its roadshow today. You've got Hinge and Omada Health, so a couple digital health companies out there, one that's priced, one that's coming. So I think there's some green shoots. I think what's tricky is the calendar, that this is all happening now. I think if Liberation Day hadn't occurred and this stuff had all started 1 month earlier, you might see a bunch more filings right now. Summer is always kind of a dead time for IPOs. People come back post Labor Day. Look, there should be a very vibrant IPO market in the second half of this year, outside of some sort of macro collapse, because you have a massive pipeline of companies. You have investors in venture capital funds and private equity funds that have been screaming for distributions for years now. And the market is strong. The fundamentals are strong. There should have been a strong IPO market last year and the year before. Finally, though, if we get a handful that have gone out and continue to price well in the aftermarket, or price well and then trade well in the aftermarket, there shouldn't be anything holding it back. But the only reason I've got any hesitancy in that is there shouldn't have been anything holding it back last year either.